Well, for the next 6 hours, watch Book TV's coverage from Book Expo America, the annual trade show for the publishing industry that features author events, educational panels, and information on soon-to-be published books. This year's expo was held at the Javits Center in New York City. First, prominent nonfiction and historical fiction authors discuss their latest releases and take questions from the Javits Center audience at the annual Author Breakfast. It's about an hour 20 minutes.
And that brings us to the program of Ebert, Enright, and Larson. I'm here to do a form of double duty of sorts, to act as a master of ceremonies and as an author. The two are related because my book is nonfiction, and it is titled Tension City, which is to be published in September. It's about being a kind of master of ceremonies, otherwise known as a moderator, mostly of nationally televised presidential and vice presidential debates. I've moderated 11 of those delightfully hairy events, and I have the psychic scars deep down throughout my soul to show for all of the 11. My book is about my experiences as a moderator, but also I interviewed most of the presidential and vice presidential candidates about their experiences with these debates, and I interviewed them over a period of 20 years. And the title Tension City comes from something that former President George H.W. Bush told me when I was asking him about, what those debates were like, and he said, those big-time things, oh, it was Tension City, Jim. So that's where I got the title. Smart, huh? Right? Anyhow, my own description of what it was like to be a moderator for all of these debates, by analogy is, and it's in the book, is walking carefully down the blade of a very sharp knife. One little push here, there, or whatever, and you can get cut and hurt very badly. In the book, I tell the story of the so-called killer question in which George W. Bush was involved. It was in a 1988 debate with Michael Dukakis, when the moderator, Bernard Shaw of CNN, asked Dukakis, I'm sure many of you will remember this, Governor, if Kitty Dukakis were raped and murdered, would you favor an irrevocable death penalty for the killer? Irrevocable, by the way. Death penalty for the killer. And as many of you may recall, Dukakis began his answer very calmly, ever so calmly, with, quote, no, I don't, Bernard, and I think you know that I've been opposed to the death penalty during all my life. He went on to explain his intellectually based opposition to capital punishment, and according to the punditry at the time, he went on to lose the election because of that. There's an interesting backstory about the question itself. It involves the efforts of his fellow journalists, panelists, all three being women journalists, to persuade Bernie Shaw behind the scenes not to ask that question. The bottom line I discovered in doing my research is that the famous and distinguished journalists of this world are no different than real people. They also see and hear the same thing in different ways, as you will see. I also tell the whole story of the famous 27 minutes when in 1976 the audio went dead in the debate between Jimmy Carter and Gerald Ford. It's a debate in Philadelphia. Ford and Carter, when the audio went dead, as you may recall, Ford and Carter, one stood at one podium, the other one stood at the other podium, and they both just stood there silently for 27 minutes while they tried to fix the audio. They didn't speak to one another. They didn't even look at each other. Edwin Newman, who was the moderator, offered them a chair, and Newman said afterward, not only did they not sit down, they did not even acknowledge that I had suggested it. So I interviewed both Ford and Carter about all of that, and both admitted it was a true embarrassment. Carter said, I think, quote, I think to some degree it let the American people size up the candidates, and I don't think either one of us made any points on that deal. And that was really true. The incident was one of many through the years when points were made, decisive points were made, in a debate that had nothing to do with what was said by the candidates with their words. It was what they said with their body language. First, the first debate, the first televised debate, Kennedy-Nixon, 1960, it was Nixon's appearance that lost that debate and won it for Kennedy. Those who listened to that on the radio thought Nixon was the winner, but those on television did not think so. The 2000 debate in Boston between Al Gore and George W. Bush is another example. I moderated that one. That was the famous sign debate, which showed Gore, every time Bush would answer a question, Gore would grimace and sigh and all that sort of stuff in the reaction shots. And it showed Gore in a way that the voters didn't like. And the polls after that debate, before that debate, they were neck and neck, and after that debate, Gore fell behind and pretty much stayed behind from that point on. In my case, here I was the closest person to those two candidates, but I have a rule. I always look at the person who's speaking, not at the person who's listening, because I didn't want to be part of any kind of reaction. So when the debate was over, we were walking out of the hall. I was walking out of the hall with my family, and one of my daughters said, "Oh, Dad, that was something what Gore did, wasn't it?" And I stopped and said, "What did Gore do? What are you talking about?" And she told me about the sign. I had completely missed it, and I was the closest one to it. You could say the same thing on the body language between the first McCain-Obama debate in 2008. It was in Oxford, Mississippi. I also moderated that one. If you may recall, McCain would not look at Obama. He would not address any questions to Obama directly. And that's despite the pleas of the delightfully charming moderator to get him to do that. He just wouldn't do it. And here again, he came over in a negative way to a lot of people. He seemed fidgety, he seemed nervous, he seemed angry, while Obama, on the other hand, was more than willing to look at McCain and address the questions and do all of that. And said he came over as calm and cool. And here again, Obama took the lead after that debate, and he never lost it after that. Bottom line here, which I have certainly concluded, is that voters watch presidential debates to take the measure of the full measure of a candidate in ways that sometimes have absolutely nothing to do with what a candidate thinks about a particular issue. They want to know whether he or she is likable, how he or she might act when the unexpected happens, when there is another 9/11, another Katrina, or something like that. It has to do more with personality, because by the time these debates happen, remember, there are usually only 2 or 3 weeks to go before the election, and most people have already made up their minds, and they're leaning. And so what they're really looking for is, who is this person? And that's what they're looking for more than they are what the position is on Social Security or whatever. I also have some points in the book about just some general comments about interviewing and moderating all kinds of things. And I talk about the need to do homework and preparation. A lot of people think it's so you can write really terrific questions. No, that's not it at all. You do your homework so you'll be relaxed enough to listen to the answers. And my example always is, I'm interviewing a senator, and I say, "Senator, do you think we should sell more grain to Cuba?" "Yes, Jim, I think we should sell more grain to Cuba, but before we do that, we should bomb Havana." And I say, "What kind of grain, Senator?" Because that was the question I had written down. And you have to guard against that. Everybody has to guard against that. The one other thing I would say, finally, is that if you read, not if, but when you read Tension City, you will see that my wife Kate is all the way through the book. She is here. Where are you, Kate? I saw you. Where are you? Oh, here she is. I'm sorry, right in front of me. Right. There's all the way through, because she helps me all the way through these things, but two ways in particular. There's a great security issue, as you can imagine, for these debates, because the moderator makes up all the questions, and he or she alone knows what the questions are. He or she alone decides which ones to ask. There is no advance word that goes to any of the candidates or anybody else. So if one candidate's person could find out ahead of time what one of the questions might be or would be a terrific advantage. So the security, in my case, about 6 or 7 days before a debate, I don't talk about it with anybody, even on our own staff. I never ever suggest to anybody any questions that I'm thinking about or in any way whatsoever, because I don't want to put anybody in a position to lie, even though I know if security is good, I want to make sure it's secure. So as a consequence, the only person I ever read the questions to before it starts is Kate. And I always take every suggestion she has, and of course, and if she criticizes it, I take that criticism and I change it, of course. But anyhow, no, I do run the whole thing by her. And one thing she did in the very first debate I did was also an earlier Dukakis George H.W. Bush debate in 1988. My first debate, we were in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, and I was just really whining about, we were ready to get in a car and go to be taken to the hall for the debate, and I was just nervous as hell. And I started whining about all the pressure, and Kate she didn't throw me against the wall. It's not her style, but not literally. But she said, "Now, just wait a minute. You think you got a problem? Think about those two candidates. They say one thing that's slightly wrong or slightly this or do one thing this way or that way. It could cost them the presidency of the United States, which is arguably the most powerful position in the world. And you think you got a problem?" I remind myself of Kate's words every time I do one of these debates. September, I will be out on book tour. Hopefully I will see some of you out there. You will recognize me as the guy going door to door, saying, "Hi, I'm Jim Lehrer," and I'll hold up my book and say, "It's Tension City, and I hope you'll buy it." I learned several books ago, as I'm sure all authors have learned, that it helps to have a gig of some kind when you go out on book tour, an act, so to speak. Well, I developed 11 books ago an act. It was when I was peddling a novel of mine called White Widow, which is the story of a Trailways bus driver in the 1950s who has a mad love affair with a passenger, beautiful woman passenger, but only in his mind, but with real-world consequences. And it was based on my experience. Now, I didn't have a love affair and all that sort of stuff, but I worked as a ticket agent in a Continental Trailways bus depot in Victoria, Texas in the 1950s, and that's where the experience came that led to this book. So to prove my authenticity as a ticket agent on book tour, every place I went, bookstores, libraries, lecture platforms, public television stations, street corners, I would do this. "May I have your attention, please? This is your last call for Continental Trailways, 8:10 p.m., Silverside's air-conditioned through-liner to Houston, now leaving from Lane 1. For Inez, Edna, Ganado, Louise, El Campo, Pierce, Wharton, Hungerford, Kendleton, Beasley, Rosenberg, Richmond, Sugar Land, Stafford, Missouri City, and Houston. All aboard! Don't forget your baggage, please." Be forewarned, boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen, if you see me coming on book tour for Tension City, I'll figure out a way to do a bus call, because I'll figure out a way to make it relevant. I've got a few weeks to work on how I can make that relevant, but I will. But now, enough about me, and let's get on to the real business of this morning. Our first author is Roger Ebert, known and admired as America's premier movie critic. He began his labors in 1967 with the Chicago Sun-Times. He was the first movie critic ever to win the Pulitzer Prize. His television programs with partners, Gene Sissel, and later with Richard Roper, were also the best of the class. His memoir, Life Itself, will be published in September. It is an honor and a privilege to present to you Roger Ebert.
Good morning, everyone. You are listening to a computer voice named Alex who lives in my laptop. He fulfills my dream of being able to speak better than HAL 9000 in 2001, A Space Odyssey. But he doesn't sound as good as my wife, Jez, so I'm going to ask her to do some reading this morning. This will be from a chapter in my book about appearing on talk shows.
Good morning. I'm going to read a little bit for Roger, but before I start, I want to just say one thing. On behalf of Roger, I'd like to thank everyone at the Grand Central table. This is a new relationship for him, and from the very beginning, they have been stellar, and we just want to thank them this morning. And one other thing, yesterday at the airport, it was really dicey, touch and go as to whether we would get here because of the weather. They canceled our flight. Another flight was 4 hours delayed, and someone jokingly said to Roger, "You know, that guy was predicting the end of the world. Do you think this is it?" And Roger said, "No, I have to go to the Book Expo breakfast in New York tomorrow." So anyway, here we go. Gene and I were invited to appear on a TV show in Milwaukee named Dialing for Dollars. We weren't so sure. Could serious film critics appear on such a show? How would it make us look? Boys, 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 our producer Thea Flom said. Do you think the audience for Dialing for Dollars is going to be thinking about things like that? She put us through a dry run. She spun an imaginary drum and plucked out a 3x5 card on which she had written her own name. And the winner is Thea Flom. Gene read, "Congratulations, Thea, you won $1." We started to get other invitations. We were invited to Baltimore to appear on a morning show hosted by a young woman named Oprah Winfrey. Oprah, who was not yet Oprah, breezed into the green room to chat. I liked her. She explained we would appear after a segment with a vegetarian chef, and before the wrap-up segment would be the Chipmunks performing with hula hoops. The show did not go smoothly. While pureeing zucchini, the vegetarian chef knocked over the blender and all the zucchini sprayed all over the interview sofa. During the commercial break, Oprah covered the sofa with the Baltimore Sun and told us to sit quietly and don't rustle. In the wings, we could see the Chipmunks waiting with their hula hoops. Oprah moved to Chicago not long after, joining the same ABC station where I'd just been hired to review movies on the news. Morning shows in those days invariably had co-hosts, and they caught a lot of criticism for risking the Channel 7 slot on an unknown young African-American woman, especially when she would be going up against Phil Donahue at the height of his popularity.
So forlorn was the AM Chicago time slot that in the week before Oprah's premiere, I was actually the substitute host. I remember in particular interviewing Sophia Loren about a new perfume she was introducing. "What is the perfume made from?" I asked innocently. Then I realized she had no idea. She replied, "Oh, flowers, you know," and things like that. Although some strange stories have gone around, it is not true to say Oprah and I ever dated. We went to the movies once. She asked me if I went to the movies all the time, and when I said I went at least 5 times a week, she said, "Why don't you take me sometime?" So I did.
I'm glad that was the last time he took her to the movies. It was after that first movie that we had our historic dinner. She told me she was being courted by both King World and the ABC station group to go into syndication, but she had her doubts about King. "If you fail in syndication, you're off the air," she said. "It's merciless. If I go with ABC, they own stations in major markets, so I'm more protected." We were at a hamburger hamlet on Rush Street in Chicago. I took a napkin and I wrote, "Here's what I'm making at Tribune right now," I said, writing down $500,000. Gene makes the same, so figure on making twice that. We're on half an hour. You're on an hour, times 2. You're on 5 days a week. We're on once, times 5. You're in prime daytime. We're in fringe weekends, worth at least twice as much. $500,000 times 2 times 2 times 5 times 2. Oprah studied the napkin and said, "Okay, Roger, I'm going with King World." In the fullness of time, Johnny Carson invited us on his show. We'd done a lot of TV by this time, but we were both terrified. We sat in the same dressing room for moral support. The door opened, and it was Johnny Carson, standing there live in the same room. We jumped to our feet. He welcomed us into the show, and then he disappeared. "Roger," Gene said, "you and I do not belong here. We belong at home in Chicago watching this on TV." The door opened, and it was one of Johnny's writers. "Now, Johnny may ask you for some of your favorite movies so far this year," he said. Then he left. Gene and I looked at each other in terror. "Name a movie you like," Gene said. Gone with the Wind," I said. Gene telephoned our producer in Chicago. "Will you please list some movies we like?" When Johnny retired and Leno won the late night war, when Johnny retired and Leno won the late night, war began between himself and David Letterman. There was speculation that Dave would jump networks. Gene and I were guests on the Letterman show the very evening that was scheduled to be announced, but we didn't discuss it with him. Indeed, we never discussed anything with him, apart from 2 occasions. Leno now routinely circulated among dressing rooms, chatting with all his guests before a show, but Letterman never did. That wasn't because he didn't like us. In fact, before Gene's death, we actually held the record for most appearances on his show. My guess is Dave waited for the starting gun at the beginning of every show and didn't believe in dissipating his energy before the red light went on. Leno, on the other hand, liked to be everybody's friend. He genuinely did like the movies. He was obsessed by them, in fact, and in the dressing room before the show, he would debate our latest reviews and usually find fault with them. Talk show guests are pre-interviewed by a writer, and the host is armed with note cards suggesting questions and the expected answers. "You guys are the ideal guest," Leno's writer Steve Ridgway told Richard Roper and me once. "Your segments always run long," he said, "because Jay won't shut up about the movies." Gene and I were on the Carson show.
Gene and I were on the Carson show once, following Chevy Chase, who had just promoted his Christmas release, The Three Amigos. We talked a little, and then Johnny said, "Roger, what's your least favorite Christmas picture?" We were looking directly at each other when he said that, and I noticed an almost invisible expression flash across his face. I knew what the answer had to be, and I believe, in that second, Johnny did, too. I paused. "The Three Amigos," I said. There was a strange audience reaction. Audiences expect guests on talk shows to be nice. Chevy Chase saved the moment by quickly saying, "Looking forward to your next picture." Carson did one his double takes and said, "Gee, I wished I hadn't said that." I said, "Me too."
One of the reasons for the success of our show and our interest as talk show guests is that, like the victims of some curse in a fairy tale, we were compelled to tell the truth. We were critics. We couldn't tell diplomatic lies. We had each other to keep us honest. There might be a temptation to say something diplomatic, but the other guy would call you on it. If I tried to talk around Johnny's question, Gene would have jumped like a wolf. "Gee, Raj," he'd say, "you were saying just the other day how much you hated Chevy's movie." Neither one of us could pass up an opening. If Johnny has asked Gene the question, he would also certainly have said, "The Three Amigos." The other time Gene and I talked privately with Letterman broke all precedent. "Dave would like to talk to you in his office after the show," a producer told us. Gene got all wound up. "Roger," he said, "this can only mean one thing. He wants us to do a talk show for Worldwide Pants." As it happened, that was the night when I experienced the biggest, genuine, spontaneous laugh I've ever witnessed on a talk show. Gene was telling his story about the time he and John Wayne went into a Greasy Spoon at 2 a.m. and the waitress came over, saw John Wayne, and crossed herself. "What was the name of the movie he was making?" Dave asked. "Chisholm." "Chisholm," Gene said. There was a moment of silence. I was sitting in the chair next to Letterman. My neck swiveled. Our eyes met. Ba-boom. Dave and I in the audience, and after a while, even Gene broke into uncontrolled laughter. This was a good omen for our new talk show. "They'll probably want us to move to New York," Gene said, fretting. After the show, a producer took us upstairs to Dave's surprisingly modest office in Worldwide Pants. We sat in 2 chairs facing him. "I've got a problem, and I think you boys might be able to help me." Gene smiled confidently at Dave. Dave continued, "Now, you guys were both on the show we did at the Chicago Theater," Dave said. "Oprah was on the same show. Remember that night?" We did. "Something happened that night. I don't know what it was, but Oprah has never come back on the show again, and she won't even talk to me. You know Oprah. Has she ever said anything to you about it?" "She never said a word to us," we said. "People often seem to assume that since we were from Chicago, we all hung out together. The truth is, if you have access to Oprah, you respect it. You don't ask for a lot of favors. You don't assume. If you are my grandchild, I might be able to call one of her producers and get you a ticket to a taping of her show on your birthday, but that's about it." "Okay, that doesn't surprise me," Dave said. But now how about Michael Jordan? He also won't come on my show. And I have no idea why. Is it because Oprah said something to him?" Gene and I looked at each other. Gene was actually close to Michael, but we didn't have a clue. "Right," said Dave, crackling his knuckles. "That's what I expected. Okay, well, thanks for your time. Great show tonight."
When people asked Letterman why he had 2 interview chairs, his usual answer was Siskel and Ebert. After Gene's death in 1999, David had me as a guest one more time to promote my first Great Movies book, and then never again. He didn't get mad at me or anything like that. It was simply that Gene and I were a double act. As our early producer Joe Antello told us long ago, individually, you're nothing. Together, you're stars. These days, it's not often you see Letterman needing that second chair. I thought of it as Gene's chair. He thought of it as my chair. We kept meticulous track of whose turn it was to sit next to Dave. Right now, it's my turn.
Kate and I have a quick talk show story to tell. Kate, as most of you know, is a novelist, and we happened to have novels out at the same time, and we appeared as, husband and wives who had novels out at the same time. We were on the Today Show. Kate's mother late mother lived in McKinney, Texas, little town where Kate grew up, north of Dallas. She called her mother and said, "Mother, I'm going to be on the Today Show in the morning." She said, "Great." So we did the Today Show thing, and then right after the show, or an hour or so later, she hadn't heard anything. Kate hadn't heard anything from her mother, so she called. Kate called her mother and said, "Well, did you see it? What did you think?" She said, "Well, you didn't have your hair combed right." Our next author this morning is Anne Enright, an award-winning writer of fiction from Ireland. The first of her novels was The Wig My Father Wore, which was published in 1995. Her fourth, The Gathering, won the Man Booker Prize in 2007. She has also had a distinguished career as a producer of quality television programs in Ireland. She is here today on behalf of her new novel, The Forgotten Waltz. Anne Enright.
Listening to Jim earlier, I got really worried about my body language. I thought I might, do it all wrong. And then after Roger's wonderful presentation, I stopped worrying about stupid stuff. It's lovely to be in America, where the readers have been so kind to me. I was thinking about the sparks of the book, The Forgotten Waltz. They're always somehow a secret. It takes you a while to remember them or to uncover them. But my father looked at me on Christmas Day in 2008, and he's in his mid-80s. I am, whatever age I am. I spent a year on the road in 2008 trying to look well-known. And he looked at me and, I'm too fond of my father to talk about him much. I talk about my mother all the time. I say, "Oh, my mother said this," and then she said, "Oh, your hair wasn't combed right," or whatever. But I don't talk about my father much, and he doesn't talk much at all. He's a quiet man. And these silences in our lives, I think, are the most interesting thing. He kept looking at me on Christmas Day, as I say, and I knew what he wanted to communicate to me was how delighted he was with me, basically, and how proud. And he's allowed to do that because he's my father. That's allowed. I realized that I hadn't seen much in fiction of what it is to love a daughter, either a grown-up daughter, as I am, or a young daughter. The Victorians wrote about fathers and daughters, Dickens and Henry James. Updike occasionally has a daughter. Saul Bellow has that amazing scene where Herzog sees his daughter being bathed by another man. But modern male writers, it seems to me, don't write much about family men. I think it's turning again now in recent years. But for, the formative years of my writing life, the family man was not the man you met in literature. And how a man loved was not something you were necessarily going to find out by page 63. This, despite the fact that on the plane coming over, the guy beside me did nothing but organize pictures of his little daughter to music from maybe the age of 6 to the age of 10. So this unspoken thing, this unwritten thing, I mean, I'm always interested, as I say, in the silences. This very benign and yet somehow still taboo subject was part of the secret argument of the Forgotten Waltz. It is the kind of the underground stream, as it were, that surfaces at the end of the book. It is the sweet water that runs underneath it. I was born in Dublin, reared in Dublin, which is a writing town. In, you know, Manhattan, if you want to make your mark, you go out and make money. In Dublin, you go home and write a book. That's what we do. It's painful at times that you're talking to somebody perfectly normal, you know them all their life, and then they suddenly turn around and write a book. But when people say, why did you become a writer? How did you become a writer? When did you decide to become a writer? I don't know if I decided at all. I think it was just the kind of thing that somebody like me did in Dublin. It was an arranged marriage. And now I'm very happy in my arranged marriage. I love my arranged, you know, career. But I don't know whether I made a decision. It was just writing books was the thing that a girl like me, everybody knew it was what I would love to do. It was what I was destined to do. I came from a very ordinary family, if such a thing exists. I'm not sure it does, actually. But I came from a very middle-class background, and there were books in the house. There was no money in the house. Nobody in Ireland had money in the 70s. But this kind of sense of that writing was something available as a career meant that when that adolescent roar of I need to say something, I must express myself in some way, arrived, I was ready to run with the ball and not drop it. But I don't know what kind of child I was either. I don't know if people do know what kind of child they are. I mean, I read all the time. I remember my mother used to say to me sometimes, she'd say, oh, you were here before, she'd say. If I said something serious and wise, she'd say, oh, you were here before, meaning that I had been through many lives in the past. And I remember thinking something similar about my son, who's 8. He'd just been in the school drama production of Sleeping Beauty, and because no boys wanted to do drama, he was the prince, he was the king, and he was the huntsman. And he came off the stage afterwards and he said to me at the age of 8, he said, you know, the stage is where I feel most alive. And I said, you were here before. But that mystery that I see now in children and that my parents perhaps saw in me is also very much part of the book. The strangeness and the wonderful strangeness of children. Anyway, that child turned into this writer. I got a job by accident in television, and I worked at that for a while, and it was great fun. It was a bit of a kind of wonderful car crash. I got out in 1993, and for the next 14 years I stayed at the desk, and I wrote, you know, not very many books because I'm very slow. And maybe, you know, I wrote 4 novels. Ireland was a bit ambivalent about me, I have to say, because I didn't have any cows in my books, I had no rain and very little whiskey. But the rest of the world thought I was okay. And I had that amazing Irish tradition to pitch myself against, to plunder and to use. And I was doing all right. In September 2007, I came to New York. I read in Barnes & Noble in Union Square. I went to Princeton. I thought, this is really nice. I was shortlisted for the big prize, where I come from. And I thought, this is a life. This is a life. And then 2 weeks later, something changed, which was I won the damn thing. And the world changed very suddenly. The world... I hadn't changed much. I mean, I hadn't had time. Do you know what I mean? I thought I might work on becoming somebody different, but for the moment I was just pretty much the same. But the world looked at me with a different kind of, you could see it in people's eyes, that they were looking at some idea of success. And over the course of that year, 2008, as I travelled, I realised that whatever that look was about, it wasn't about me, it was about them. Whatever they brought to this idea of success was about how they felt about success and failure. And I had spent 14 years at the desk, and if anything, it's like being on an emotional roller coaster with the mute button turned on, you know, the swoops and the highs and lows of the writing life that nobody even hears, these entirely silent highs and lows. And if I'd learned anything by then, I had learned that success and failure were the enemies of talent, that wasn't what it was about. And then suddenly here it was, I was a success. And the funny thing about all of that is the work was finished when I finished the book. And I realize now that I had a new job, which was not writing. It was being the thing, you know. Instead of writing the story, I was the story. And this unsettled me. It's not particularly something I thought I was suited for. But there I was in Christmas 2008 with my father looking at me with a nice look in his eye. And I was wondering what I could take from this experience, this very turbulent year that I had put in, away from my desk. And it was quite a serious business for me to think this through and to see what I could carry away from it, what would be good for the work, as opposed to what would kill the work. And if there was any solace I could take from the whole experience of having everybody having an opinion about me one way or the other, the solace I took was from this new person I had met, which was the reader. And these were the people I met in all those towns in America, in Houston and in Boston and in San Francisco, and I met them in Sydney, and I met them in Listowel in Ireland, and I met them in Ilkley in Yorkshire, and these were the readers. And once I realized this somehow in my bones, I knew I had a way to proceed. I knew what I was going to do. I was going to write them a book. Sounds easy. So I wrote a book for them. It's called The Forgotten Waltz, and it is narrated by a woman called Gina Moynihan, who is no better than she should be. She engages in a grand passion, a big folly, a glorious mistake called Sean Vallely. Well, wouldn't you? And that man has a daughter. So the same themes that were in The Gathering of family love, of biological love, that indescribable thing, and sexual love, that often described thing, those two same tensions were in The Forgotten Waltz as in The Gathering. And Gina is, she's what's normally called younger woman, he's what's normally called an older man. Both of their marriages break up because this sort of series of mistakes they make, these lustful mistakes, turn into a different kind of life for them both, and it's a love story, the book. What was I forgot what the beginning of that sentence was. I wanted to write about adultery because I thought I'd have more fun writing about adultery than I would have writing about marriage. I have a quiet enough life in my own way. But it was also a very good boom time subject. Ireland had been through this amazing boom and bust. And I was looking at boom literature after the wars in America, after the Second World War in America. And you look, and adultery is a great subject for a society in transition as the ties loosen, as money makes things more possible and more available, and different kinds of choices are made. I also wanted to make it somehow a morally poised book, because if I was going to write it for the reader, I had two first readers. My two first readers were two friends. One of them said, that girl is a bit of a strap. She's a husband stealer, as we know. She's a marriage breaker. And the other said, I was with her 1,000%. So I thought, this is what I want. This is what I want. I want a morally poised story that people can extend the range of their experience by reading and get cross about or love. The book has come out in the UK and Ireland, and everybody has an opinion about it, which is one of the benefits of success, I suppose, and one of the downsides too. But what I have liked most, and I hope the American readers will like it too, was the women who came up to me last weekend in Enniskerry, which is a little town in Wicklow where part of the book is set, and they said, and one of them said, I read it in one go. Another woman came up to me in Dublin and said, I stayed up all night to read it. So, you know, this isn't, I know this is a book about passion, love. It's a romance. It's about the foolishness of love and the grandeur in that foolishness. But you wouldn't want, I mean, it's not a fluffy book, right? It's a bit pink, but I don't write fluffy books. This time around, I've written one for the reader. That's all I have to say. Thank you very much. Thank you.
And now to a master of nonfiction, Erik Larson. His six books have covered subjects from the Galveston hurricane and serial killings to the invention of the radio. Now in his new work, In the Garden of Beasts, he tells the story of the American ambassador to Germany during the beginning rise of Adolf Hitler and the Nazis. Erik Larson wrote for newspapers and magazines, the Wall Street Journal and Time magazine, among others, before he began putting his end results between hard covers. I give you Erik Larson.
So I'm out on book tour, and I think I met all of you last week. I'm not sure. This kind of thing makes me very nostalgic for my very first ever book event. I'm sure you all recall my very first book, The Naked Consumer. Yeah, that's a book that nobody bought. One guy read and he reviewed it and hated it because he was a target of the book. It was about how companies spy on individual consumers. And at the time I was living in Baltimore, but I did get a call. I did get a call one day to go up and do a signing at a bookstore in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, 3 hours north. So I thought, okay, now my career is on the way. My career is on the way. So I went up to do this signing. It was a Sunday afternoon signing, and we all know how those go. It was a Sunday afternoon signing. One of these things that you sit at a table with 40 books and expect people to come up in droves, and then you sign their books and they buy them and everybody's happy. So I sat there. Happily, somebody at this bookstore had made a plate of chocolate chip cookies and had put it on the table as an inducement to buy this book, because God knew nobody was going to buy it otherwise. So I was booked in for about 3 hours, and I sat there for the first hour and a half, and nobody came to talk to me. Nobody even made eye contact with me. Far from it. They were even looking at the books around me on the shelves, but they were not coming near me. You know, it's like there was something odd about me, and there was at that point. But at about the hour and a half point, I looked up, and this woman was coming towards me with the biggest smile. And I thought to myself, now is when it starts to happen. So I'm getting out my pen. She comes up to the table and she says, "How much are the cookies?" So this morning I'm going to talk a little bit about this new book of mine, In the Garden of Beasts, which in my publishing company, Crown, thank you, Crown, for a great job on this. It's almost universally referred to by its acronym, ITGOB, which I think I'm okay with that. But it's been out about 2 weeks now, and here's a strange little note. When it came out on May 10th, none of us really made the connection, but that was the anniversary of the infamous book burning in Berlin. May 10, 1933. I don't know what that means either, but I'm glad to say that thanks to all of you and to readers everywhere that the book is now actually in its 6th printing. One of the things that I pride myself on, probably wrongly, is finding stories to tell that once were a big deal but have been largely forgotten for one reason or another. So you may ask, why on earth, what was I thinking setting a book in Nazi Germany? But here's the thing, this is exactly my kind of book, because it's about a period that people think they know a lot about. I certainly thought I knew a lot about this, but really don't. I'll tell you how the idea came about. The idea hunt is a tough time for me. I'm not like other writers. When I finish a book, I don't have a backlog of ideas that I absolutely must begin working on. I always start with a blank slate. I don't know why that is, and it's a terrible time. My good friend and publicist, Penny Simon, who many of you know, refers to it as the dark country of no ideas. It was about 5 or 6 years ago, I was in that dark country looking for my next idea. And just to sort of shake things loose, I decided I was going to follow my own advice, the advice that I give to writing students on those rare occasions when I do teach, which is to read voraciously and promiscuously. Just read everything all over the map. So I went to a bookstore. And just started browsing the history section to see what covers, what kinds of books really moved me, what kinds of things bored me, and so forth. And I came across a book, Face Out, had always been on my wish list to read. 1,200 pages. It was a little intimidating. 1,200 pages, teensy type, no photographs. You know, some of you are thinking it's the Bible, but it was William Shearer's The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. Had never read it, sat down, brought it home, sat down, decided to start reading. I loved the book, if one can be said to love a book about the Third Reich. Read like a thriller. Terrific book. Maybe I'm a little slow about things like this, but I was about a third of the way through the book when I finally realized, wait a minute, William Scherer, the author, he had been there in Berlin from 1934 on. He had met all these people we know today to be monsters. Hitler, Himmler, Goering, Goebbels, the whole bunch. Only he had met them at a time when nobody knew the ending. We all know the ending, but he obviously did not. Suddenly I started imagining, or trying to imagine, what that would have been like to have met these people at a point when you didn't know how things were going to turn out. I mean, suppose you were sitting in a cafe in Berlin and you saw Hitler driven by. Would you have felt a chill? Would you have been thrilled? Or would it just have been background noise? So I started thinking it would be very interesting to do a book through the point of view of characters in Berlin in this early era. What I needed, obviously, were a couple of real-life characters, outsiders, ideally Americans, because I write for an American audience. So I hit my favorite library in Washington, the Suzzallo Library in Seattle, at the Suzzallo Library at the University of Washington. I should say also that I am a tremendous fan of libraries everywhere. I like to think of myself actually as the Indiana Jones of libraries, rappelling down the 900 levels, you know, and the Dewey Decimal System. I'm not sucking up to the libraries, this is the truth. And Melville Dewey, by the way, was a rabid anti-Semite. I don't know if any of you knew that, but he was. I love libraries so much, actually, that if you were to give me a choice, between a night with Cate Blanchett and a night locked alone in the Library of Congress, I would take the night with Cate Blanchett in a heartbeat. But I do love libraries. I started reading histories, the grand histories, works by the great masters of this era, Sir Ian Kershaw, Richard Evans, and so forth. But also, what I really liked reading were the personal memoirs and diaries, and there are many that came out of this era. At some point, I came across the diary of a man named William E. Dodd, and soon afterward, I came across a memoir by his daughter, Martha. So let me try and set the scene. Let's try to imagine for a moment. Try to imagine you are William E. Dodd. You are 63 years old. You are a mild-mannered professor of history at the University of Chicago. You're chairman of the department. You are tired of the demands of academia. You're tired of the engulfing needs of graduate students. All you want to do is finish a book, actually a multi-volume series, about the Old South that, interestingly enough, you have called The Rise and Fall of the Old South. One day in June 1933, precisely at noon, your telephone rings. The guy at the other end of the line, much to your surprise, is Franklin Delano Roosevelt, newly elected President of the United States. He asks you to be America's ambassador to Germany, America's first ambassador to Nazi Germany. This post has been empty at this point for about five months. Here's the thing, he gives you 2 hours to decide. What he doesn't tell you is that one reason he has called you, apart from the fact that he knows through a friend of his, who is a mutual friend of Dodd's, that you speak German, the main reason he's calling you is that nobody else wanted the job. 3 weeks later, you are on a ship to Germany. You've got your family with you, wife, grown son, and your 24-year-old daughter, Martha. See, this is a father-daughter book, too, you see. And she is one heck of a daughter. I'm a father of 3 daughters, so and that's, I think, partly my fascination with this whole thing. She, Martha, was the one who hooked me. She's smart, she's sexy. She has a way about her that inflames the passions of men, both young and actually not so young. At the age of 24, she has already had an affair with Carl Sandburg, who was about 55 at this point. In fact, one of the reasons that I always do my own research is because of little delightful moments like what happened to me in the Library of Congress when I was going through Martha's papers. I came across a folder that contained 2 locks of Carl Sandburg's hair. 2 locks of Carl Sandburg's hair, a little clear plastic archival envelope. And there it is, these two tufts of hair tied with black coat string, looking like little broom heads. And I'm here to tell you that his hair really was quite blonde and very coarse, very coarse. By this point, she has broken 2 engagements, and she is now in the midst of a divorce from a dead marriage to a New York banker. Possibly an oxymoron, I don't know. But she came along to Berlin for the, I hope there are no New York bankers out there. She came along to Berlin for the adventure, and she falls in love with the Nazi Revolution. She finds it intoxicating at first. She was not alone. Quite a few people thought Hitler was good for Germany. You could quarrel with his methods, but, you know, he was helping restore the nation's pride. He claimed all he wanted was to make Germany an equal among other nations. In fact, the night before the Dodds left New York, which is where they had gathered in order to catch their ship the next day, they went to a fancy dinner party on Park Avenue here in New York at the home of a very wealthy philanthropist, one of the most prominent philanthropists of his day, a fellow named Charles R. Crane. Made his fortune, the family made the fortune from plumbing equipment and supplies. And I can't speak for the women out here, but you men have seen the Crane logo staring up at you from urinals around the country. Crane takes Dodd aside as he's leaving this dinner party, and he tells him, "Let Hitler have his way. Let Hitler have his way." He also advises Dodd, in no uncertain terms, to avoid all social interaction with Jews while he's in Berlin. Let's look at the world through Martha's eyes. She finds herself in a vibrant, charismatic city. We always think of that world as drab, black and white and gray. At least I always did, mainly because those are the images we come across, black and white, you know, old newsreels and so forth. Some color footage now has come to light, but mostly it's black and white. She, of course, saw something very different. There was color everywhere, the brightly colored trams that ran on all the main streets in Berlin, the fact that almost every balcony seemed to have red geraniums on it. At Christmas, there were Christmas tree lights everywhere and Christmas trees everywhere in Berlin. So much so that Dodd writes in his diary, that you would almost think the Nazis believed in Jesus, because there is so much evidence of this love of Christmas. There were these glorious cafes that sat hundreds of people at a time, movie theaters that sat up to 1,500 people at a time. One of the most popular movies of the day was King Kong, which was said to be Hitler's favorite movie, King Kong. There was dancing every night, the roof of the Eden Hotel at Chiro's, and at this very interesting place called House of Vaterland on Potsdamer Platz. Five-story building with 5 distinct restaurant nightclub venues in it, one of which was a Rhineland Terrace bar, which had an actual artificial thunderstorm, and an American Wild West bar. This is in Hitler's Nazi Germany, Hitler's Berlin. American Wild West bar, where you would order your martini and be served it by a German in a cowboy hat. Many of these Germans being members of the Nazi Party, so I like to imagine being served a drink by a Nazi in a cowboy hat. It's just the kind of thing that delights me about history. So here we have Dodd arriving in Germany expecting rationality, expecting to encounter real statesmen, because this is what he's learned about throughout his historical training. I mean, this is, he comes to expect this certain level of rationality. Now, yes, statesmen act strangely at times, but they act like statesmen. He also brings with him the experience of having been in Germany in the 1890s as a student. One thing men typically did, young men in the 1890s, they often went to Germany to do advanced study because the universities were so good. So Dodd went to the University of Leipzig to do his doctoral thesis. Inexplicably, he did it on Thomas Jefferson from Leipzig. But his experience in Leipzig was wonderful. He just had the best time. He loved the Germans. Every day, a young woman would put violets on his pillow. So he comes to Germany bearing this personal history, this expectation of rationality. What he finds is pathology. And I'm not just talking metaphorically. He finds organic pathology. His Consul General, George Messersmith, in a secret dispatch to the State Department, described Hitler, Goering, and Goebbels as people who, in any other place or any other time, would be receiving treatment somewhere. This is in 1933. And then here's his daughter, Dodd's daughter, Martha, who in effect falls in love with the pathology at first. I realized that the two stories provided kind of an ideal vehicle for looking at this era. I wouldn't have wanted to write about Dodd alone. I wouldn't have wanted to write about Martha alone. But the two together captured, in my view, something much bigger. Also, both undergo a very satisfying transformation, almost a novelistic transformation, but of course it's nonfiction. I realized also something else, that their stories shed light on why it took America so long to recognize the true danger of Hitler, and also why appeasement ultimately happened. In microcosmic view, why appeasement ultimately happened. But the true message of this book lies in a little quote, sort of a counter-epigraph, that I stuck at the very end of the book for die-hard readers. It's way at the end of the book, after the index. After the index. And I'm just going to read that thing to you because we're all here interested in selling and reading books and so forth. But this is the fundamental message I just wanted to convey from this book. And this is a quote by Christopher Isherwood from his book Down There on a Visit. He lived in Berlin in the 30s and came back in 1945 to visit Berlin after the savage Russian assault had essentially obliterated the territory that I write about in the book. He writes, "I walked across the snowy plain of the Tiergarten," and in literal translation, by the way, that is Garden of Beasts. "I walked across the snowy plain of the Tiergarten. A smashed statue here, a newly planted sapling there, the Brandenburger Tor, Brandenburg Gate, with its red flag, the Soviet flag, flapping against the blue winter sky. And on the horizon, the great ribs of a gutted railway station, like the skeleton of a whale. In the morning light, it was all as raw and frank as the voice of history, which tells you not to fool yourself. This can happen to any city, to anyone, to you." So I'm going to stop there. Thank you.
And that is our breakfast. I would leave you with the reminder to take with you one thing I said at the very beginning, if nothing else, and that is, don't forget your baggage, please. Thank you very much.
For more information on Book Expo America, visit bookexpoamerica.com.
On Book TV, we're joined by